Witcher, your services are required.
What's good, YouTube? The Witcher just dropped a brand new animated movie on Netflix, and if I had to sum it up in one word, I'd say mid. But let me tell you why. Netflix's adaptation of the Witcher franchise and the latest movie Sirens in the Deep prove once again that they do not understand The Witcher. The Witcher's Sirens in the Deep, while visually appealing, fails to capture the complex essence of the short story it's adapted. The anime neglects Geralt's internal conflict while he battles with his Witcher identity versus his human emotions. And this key oversight is highlighted by the focus on a simplistic love story that completely neglects the nuanced complexities of the characters involved. Sirens of the Deep gives us the start to the story with some very flashy fight scenes, a beautiful exploration of the underwater mermaid kingdom, and shows us that they're really coming in strong and heavy on the action, which is appreciated. What it fails to do is give us anything more than that. As the story unfolds, you get a shallow and uninteresting love story between Geralt and Essie David, or Little Eye, who happens to be one of Jaskier's friends. In contrast, you are also getting a love story between Prince Aglaval and Princess Shianaz of the Mermaid Kingdom, which is overall unrewarding and unsatisfying. The entire story centers on the seafaring kingdom and their struggle and inability to survive and cohabitate alongside the Mermaid Kingdom that lives just off the coast. When they arrive, Geralt is quickly introduced to Essie and they quickly fall in love. And then Geralt gets conscripted to fight for the kingdom and solve these attacks that have been happening on their fishermen. What unfolds is this uncomplicated story that involves lots of flashy fight scenes, but really fails to dive into the character development and gives us honestly a Little Mermaid rehash that no one asked for. The story and plot overall are lacking, and there isn't much substance to the entire experience. Even between Geralt and Essie, the love story just isn't there, and between Prince Aglaval and Prince Shianaz, what we're left with is a terrible rehash of The Little Mermaid, which isn't even remotely close to what the story was about. Now, while I do understand adapting a story that is primarily a love story is a bit difficult, there are ways that it could have been done better. In the short story, Geralt is depicted as a man who's torn between his Witcher code and his human identity. On one hand, he is supposed to rely on hard logic, the Witcher code, and brutal facts. On the other hand, this is a man who is in love and is deeply hurt by the woman who loved him, and he can't really navigate those feelings to see the forest for the trees. Jaskier then introduces him to a friend of his named Essie, and the entire experience unfolds as a true test of character for Geralt. A Little Sacrifice shows Geralt's constant conflict of battling with his Witcher identity while trying to confront his human emotions when dealing with Essie. Even though they do fall in love both in the animated adaptation and the short story, A Little Sacrifice showcases Geralt's struggles when interacting with Essie David. In the short story, he's getting confronted with his emotional barriers, his inability to form real human connections with other people for fear of being hurt, and his inability to get over his heartbreak.
I told you, I found it wise not to trust others.
In the animated adaptation, this is not shown so much. It's not even told. It's just forgotten, and what we're left with instead is a playboy Geralt
who said love should be wise.
In this short story, we're getting a masterful portrayal of the version of Geralt who is struggling with his identity while trying to also exist, and he gets help from characters like Jaskier and Essie who see him for who he actually is, telling him that he's more than just his responsibility. And it's this relationship exploration that is completely lost in the animation. What was once a contrast and portrayal between Geralt and Essie and his inability to just feel, with Prince Aglaval and Princess Shianaz and their inability to communicate the same type of love, is now just a forgettable experience. The anime reduces Geralt's encounters to just superficial experiences, completely lacking in the emotional depth that we get from the story. His interactions with Essie feel shallow and unrewarding, neglecting both his nuanced conversations but also his ability for growth. It really fails to capture the resonance of the story in a character that is portrayed as being constantly conflicted with what he's supposed to do versus what he wants to do. And rather than have characters like Essie and Jaskier serve as mere reflectors for his emotional journey and who he is as a person, instead we get Jaskier diminished to comedic relief.
A softy, soft, softy, soft, soft, softy, soft, ow.
How's that for soft?
Which I feel is just an insult. Jaskier is such a beautiful friend to Geralt. He shows him that even though he is a Witcher and he is supernatural, he is also still a man, and that doesn't make him any more complicated than any of the other men that he's dealt with. And I think that is a true portrayal of friendship. This is a person who isn't scared of Geralt for being a Witcher, and he doesn't even treat him differently. While he is comedic,
No talent if I shoved it up you, Geralt.
he's also realistic and serves as Geralt's mirror reflection for his humanity.
Fuck it.
As he serves to show Geralt that he is still feeling. He is a feeling creature, and just because he is hurt does not mean he cannot love again, which doesn't necessarily need to be cut out when telling a story like Sirens in the Deep. While both characters recognize what the Witcher is, they really do care about who he is as well,
You could stop this if you had a fraction of the courage that Witcher does.
and oftentimes serve as reminders throughout the story as a way to reflect back on this when he's doing his duties. And it's that key element there that makes Geralt of Rivia such a compelling character. He is both relatable and realistic. On the other hand, the story between Prince Aglaval and Princess Shianaz is shallow and superficial. What we get instead is a very shallow love story torn between individuals who just can't seem to make up their minds. Their romance lacks moral complexity and moral ambiguity, which is the true heart and essence of The Witcher. Everything exists in a moral gray area, where a lot of the decisions for Geralt, serving as the ambassador between monsters and man, often portrays characters like the mermaids, who are monsters, as being thinking and feeling creatures, both trying to exist in a world that doesn't want them. But on the other hand, Geralt is a product of mankind, and thus he fights for mankind's will, ensuring that they can live and survive in a world that will eat them alive. And this moral gray area is really where The Witcher shines, by showing us that while both cases can be just and right, it is up to us as the reader to really balance those decisions for ourselves. Geralt is just going through these worlds and solving conflicts as he encounters them, but by no means is he telling anybody what the right thing to do is or what the right thing to feel is.
But I've yet to meet a royal who doesn't care more about their vanity than their child. I wish I weren't right.
This straightforward story of a forbidden love voids the Witcher world of all the internal conflict that is usually present, which is one of the shining elements that makes the Witcher series such a great universe. While the mermaid tends to represent a poorly executed Little Mermaid, a sea witch, a singing scene, and an auntie who even assumes a human form just to marry the prince herself, it ultimately just feels like a cheap rehash. Something thrown out there just as a cash grab, and ultimately turns characters like Princess Shianaz and Prince Aglaval into shallow caricatures of their true selves. Characters like King Uzvelt, Prince Celeste don't really add anything to the story. They are just slivers of their former selves. Duke Aglaval, they represent a complex character who doesn't know how to feel, and his only way of showing love is by commanding his power, either by owning her, as he offers to build a cage for her to live in as some type of aquarium fish,
Perhaps I can build her a tank.
or by commanding people to bend to his will to get what he wants.
Lady Bard, Essie, come translate for me.
In the short story, Duke Aglaval actually commands the Witcher to capture Princess Shianaz so that he can love her the way he's supposed to. Or on the other hand, Sea Witch Melusina is another facet of Shianaz, who also happens to be a sea witch in the short story. In this regard, her only way of knowing love is through sacrifice. By giving up something, then you are showing that you love them. And it's this inability for these two to communicate on what love actually is, makes it difficult for their love story to progress. But in the end, it just shows the true moral complexities that are surrounding the Witcher world. By reducing these characters to one-dimensional archetypes, it misses the opportunity to explore these moral ambiguities. The result is a shallow and forgettable experience, one that lacks the nuanced character development and a lot of the moral complexity that is involved in the Witcher world, and it just feels like it forgets the essence of Sapkowski's work. Now, I do understand that the animated adaptation could not just be a love story. I don't think it had to break up the characters as much as it did, nor did it have to give us a watered down version of the story. I think that if the story had just focused on who those characters are, as complex and messed up as they may be, while focusing on a potential battle between the Seafaring Kingdom and the Mermaid Kingdom, we could have gotten that as a beautiful contrast where he's too focused on duty and honor as opposed to who he is and what he's supposed to represent. Where Essie, in the short story, is a longtime friend of Jaskier's, she's also a fully fleshed out bard, which gives her access to knowledge, access to books, also influence, making her a recurring figure throughout the kingdoms, which also gives us this beautiful interaction between Essie, Geralt, and Duke Aglaval. regarding the war in the Mermaid Kingdom, where she explains to him that there are horrors and monstrosities out there that we could never witness because the Switchers do not operate in the sea, they operate on land. And we miss out on one of the most chilling declarations of all from Duke Aglaval, who talks about human dominance and human expansion, and the exploitation that was fueled by what the Witchers have taught humanity. He goes on to say,
"We, Essie, are only continuing that battle. It is we, not your ballots, who create the chronicles of humanity. And we no longer need Witchers, and nothing will stop us. Nothing."
This powerful exposition is utterly lost and doesn't even make a glimpse of a showing inside of the story that shows just how committed Duke Aglaval is to his position and his kingdom. This omission of this interaction robs the story of complexity, of ambiguity, and of all the beautiful nuances that make stories like The Witcher so compelling. And it gives us a beautiful insight into the human condition that exists within the Witcher world, where many of the kingdoms, especially those with power, are often fueled by corrupt narratives. They don't really get to dive into that in the animated version. Where Geralt is bound by his Witcher code, his past traumas, and his internal conflict, this isn't really the case for Duke Aglaval, nor is it the case for any of the other characters, where they are doing whatever feels right to them because they have the power. Geralt's journey is a constant negotiation and delicate balancing act between duty and desire, and the contrast between him and Aglaval is one that just doesn't exist. The anime fails to give this struggle any light of day, and thus the contrasting love stories between Geralt and Aglaval with Shianaz and Essie just doesn't exist, and it ultimately fails to give us the thematic depth that is necessary for such a story as this. Sirens of the Deep really misses the opportunity to dive deep into who Geralt is as a person and the kind of conflicts that he carries with him every day, really giving us the why Geralt acts as opposed to the when Geralt acts. By flattening out Geralt's emotional journey, it really doesn't give us anything worthwhile watching. While it is a very flashy and very gorgeously animated show, the characters ultimately feel unrepresentative and the whole story as a whole feels unrewarding. Instead of an echo of steel and sentiment, we are left with a drowning melody. It's a disservice to the Witcher franchise and the world that Geralt tends to live in. The Witcher universe is a beautiful and nuanced place, and even has such deep and rich lore that goes well beyond just the books, making the entire experience wrapped up in one word as mid. Well, my name is Kami, you've just been mixed and nerded, so please hit that like button, drop a comment down below if you agree or disagree, let me know. And don't forget to hit the bell so that you can be caught up on more reviews like this, or if I find something you should be watching, I'll let you know first. Peace!